So Gotham Knights released a new gameplay demo focusing on Nightwing and Red Hood gameplay. The reception so far has been a bit lackluster, one more of disappointment rather than anger I suppose. So I kind of want to look at what feels off about this gameplay demo, and why they often feel a bit bland, uninteresting, especially for more seasoned players. I think the first big thing to bear in mind is that these games are pre-release, so certain elements aren't necessarily final, and the build of the game shown off in May will maybe be based off a different build that is actually from March, February, or maybe even earlier. This means that the dev team do still have plenty of time to potentially polish the gameplay that you're seeing, so just bear that in mind. To help provide some context in this video, I'm going to be using footage from both Batman Arkham Knight and Spider-Man on the PS4. I'll be using official pre-release gameplay footage and then also showing gameplay that I captured myself to show what the level of changes we might see before the game's final release on October 25th are. Not that it's a one-to-one comparison, but you know, I thought it might give a more rounded outlook than just watching the demo footage itself. Now, when watching the 13 minutes or so of new gameplay, I thought its biggest problem was just it showed way too much. As a general way to get people hyped about your new game, it felt really slow at times and just kind of plodded its way through its information. It could have easily been edited down to maybe half the length, with a much quicker explanation of systems, especially those that don't feel very new or unique. You know, the traversal and stealth segments, they seem fine, maybe a little bit shallow at the moment, but the Belfry stuff just seems kind of unnecessary to show. And then the gear system just kind of seems unnecessary to the entire game, from what I can tell. As a player that loves the Arkham games and also Destiny 2, let me tell you, even I don't want to deal with a loot system in a Batman game of all places. If you want the players to feel unique, focus on cool costume customization and a bunch of different gadgets that you can work towards to make different builds, things like that, not epic loot. The real focus, in my eyes, should just be showing us how unique and interesting the different members of the Bat family are. However, watching Red Hood take multiple minutes to take down one enemy, it really isn't a good look, and I just kind of sighed to myself when the enemy revived itself. That being said, I'm really looking forward to the concept of a co-op Batman game. Just what has been shown so far hasn't impressed. And in terms of combat, these are the main things I have concerns about. Firstly, yes, the fighting does look pretty slow in the game. Secondly, the abilities just seem to lack an actual impact. And lastly, the players bounce back and forth across a very large distance between enemies, in what I'm going to call slidiness. There is also just kind of a general feeling that Red Hood is going to feel less satisfying to play as due to the ranged focus of his moveset. These are certainly all concerns when watching a demo for this game, and watching the videos myself, it did have one simple answer that probably helps towards solving all of these issues, and that is enemy density. If these fights take place in the middle of a crowd, rather than between 4 or 5 enemies on a rooftop, the slowness and the kind of lack of impact will kind of be lost in the midst of a large gang of street thugs or owls? I haven't read The Court of Owls yet. I have the comics now in plan of reading them before Gotham Knights comes out. Don't hate me, but yeah, I guess owl, or is it talons or something like that? I'm not quite sure, but you know what I mean. Plus, you know, there'll be less of that strange slidiness in combat when all the enemies aren't so far apart. The Red Hood problem, I have less of an answer for, and this is why I wanted to take a look at Arkham Knight. Arkham Knight had its problems, sure, but most of that was the focus on the Batmobile and just the pure amount of Riddler puzzles in the game, none of which Gotham Knight seems to have included. In Arkham Knight, the free-flow combat system was pretty well refined at that point, with it being the 4th Batman game to utilise at the time. Plus, you can play as Nightwing, Robin, Batgirl and Red Hood in the AR challenges. So it will give us a pretty reasonable comparison and also a decent aspirational point for Gotham Knights to hit. I know it was Rocksteady that developed Arkham Knight, but the Gotham Knights developers, WB Games Montreal, did make Arkham Origins, so they do also have a lot of experience with these systems already. So interestingly enough, this video script originally started with this point kind of being the turning point in the video, where I defend the gameplay in the demo, explain some reasons behind it looking weird, and then try to replicate that kind of action in Spider-Man and in Arkham Knight. And then I played Arkham Knight again. Playing Arkham Knight, the animations are really fast, pack a punch, and even when the super slidiness happens, your player speeds across the screen to minimize the amount of time it looks super silly. I mean, it always looks very silly, yeah, for sure, but it does actually feel satisfying as you're not constantly losing your combo. It's just that the Arkham games know that it needs to minimize the amount of time your character looks stupid, so you can get back to looking like a giant bat-shaped badass again. Then there is the Red Hood problem, and honestly, I don't know the ideal solution for making him play better. After all, I'm not a game designer, and this is a problem that needs to be solved by people much smarter than myself. I did go back and play as Red Hood in Arkham Knight, and quite frankly, the reason he plays so well there is because all of the Bat family are essentially just Batman, with a couple of slightly altered gadgets and animations. Sure, Red Hood shoots his guns, but really only as a replacement for throwing a batarang or breaking someone's leg as Batman. When you actually break down the movesets, they are really similar, and that's kind of something that Gotham Knights just can't do. Each of the 5 members of the Bat family need to feel very distinct from one another when you're playing as them, or else they've kind of betrayed the entire selling point of the game. Yes, I know, I did say 5 members and technically it's 4, but let's face it, at some point we're going to unlock Batman as a 5th character. Maybe it'll be at the end of the game, maybe it'll be paid DLC to sell the season pass, I'm not sure, but it's happening. The game's story is based off the Court of Owls comic, a comic that, as I said, I've not read yet, but I'm pretty sure Batman fakes his own death in that comic book. It's the main inspiration for the game, so yeah, I'm pretty sure that Batman's not actually dead and we're going to play him at some point. One thing we have to bear in mind is the purpose of, the gameplay demo. It's meant to explain and demonstrate the game's mechanics and introduce us to new gameplay elements. So to fulfill that purpose, it has to be quite slowly paced, giving viewers time to understand what is going on. You know, it needs smooth camera movements and probably a slow talking narrator over the top. Not to say that any of this is a bad thing necessarily, the video just has to be basic and easy to grasp. So lots of quick actions, just fast sloppy camera movements and comboing together complex mechanics, it's just not going to really go down well for a lot of potential players. When recording Arkham and Spider-Man footage for this video, I did do my best to initially replicate what a demo-like game experience might be, just by kind of keeping my movements slow, using mostly basic attacks and dodges to just get myself outside of crowds when possible. I then recorded some, regular gameplay of me just playing the game, in which I tried to use some more complex moves, keep my combo going, play a bit faster. I'm a little bit rusty at the games, it's been a while, but if anything, that kind of makes it a bit closer to the experience of watching an E3 demo. But just looking at the gameplay, you can see how often my character gets lost in the middle of crowds, and when more complex enemies get thrown into the mix, it's really hard to explain every move that I'm using to counter specific targets all in one go in a big crowd. There's just a lot going on in those games. If you've never played one of the Arkham games before, trying to learn how the basic combat works while also being told how to deal with each of the 5, 6, 7 different enemy classes on screen all at once, it could just become really overwhelming. So while battling a few basic enemies and taking it slow doesn't sound very interesting to watch, it's naturally what companies are going to show for marketing material, as anyone can kind of grasp what's happening on screen, and it keeps the barrier of entry super low. That being said, when I did try to find combat scenarios like this for my gameplay, it was actually hard to find a fight that didn't immediately turn into a big brawl with, 10, 20 goons. And if I did, it was in small, more confined arenas rather than large rooftop areas like we saw in the recent Gotham Knights gameplay. I'm sure if I spent a bunch of time in the games. I could find better examples if I really tried, but my point is, the games seem to know that more enemies equals more fun, especially if you're fighting in those smaller arenas to keep up the pace of combat. I think I did a decent job to get some gameplay that looked like similar to what a demo might be, but even when playing like that, the moves still felt like really fast and snappy and had a lot of impact. I mean, sure, standing still as Spider-Man, just spamming abilities doesn't really look fun, but it does work, and each of the gadgets feel pretty good by themselves to use. Like, it is still fun to set up trip mines to lure the demons in, or to let a gang of spider-bots go out and do your dirty work for you. Nothing looked quite as just, I don't know, lackluster as some of the things we saw in the Gotham Knights demos. Even going back and watching the first one starring Batgirl and Robin, which people seem to say looked a bit more exciting. And then going back and watching like the old trailers for Arkham Knight or Spider-Man, they didn't look that way at any point either. I am still really looking forward to the game, but this experience of trying to defend gameplay demo footage kind of taught me that, yeah, some of that is the problem, but other parts of this game just look a little bit off. My speculation might be that the gear and leveling system is part of the problem, because it means that combat has to be, you know, more ability oriented, and that can kind of incentivize the devs to make enemies spongy and harder to kill. Like, for example, that fight with the Talon Gladiator that took far too long. I'm really hoping Gotham Knights can improve before October. I just really want to enjoy a co-op game where I can kick ass as Batgirl and Nightwing. But also just remember that a demo doesn't always tell the full story.